back to another episode of the Denway podcast. I have a special guest on. Her name is Sunaura, and I hope that I'm saying that right because I've been looking at your name all morning. And I'm like, I don't know how to say it, so I really don't want to mess it up. So,
You said it right. That's perfect.
Sunaura, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you.
No problem. I thank you for being on the show, and I'm definitely looking forward to having a conversation with you. I know that. Well, first of all, where are you from again?
I'm kind of from all over, actually. So I was born in Tucson, and I lived there until I was about 6, Tucson, Arizona. And then my family moved to Georgia, and I grew up in Athens, Georgia. And then in where?
I would say Athens, Georgia. Yeah,
Athens, Georgia. And then, in my grown-up life, I've kind of lived all over too. I've lived in New York, lived in Bay Area, then in Tucson, and now I'm back in the Bay Area. So I'm talking to you from Berkeley right now.
That's cool. So let me ask you, where's your favorite place that you have lived that you just like, this is my favorite place to be?
Oh, it's such a hard question because I get really, really attached to a lot of different places. So I feel like I have a lot of like nostalgia for the places that I'm not in. So I really miss Tucson. Just like the desert. I get really, really cold really easily, just something with my bones and muscles. And so I actually love how hot it is there. Same with Georgia. I miss the heat and I miss the fireflies and the thunderstorms in the South. So I love a lot of places that I live. I love California too. It's California. It's also it's the most wheelchair accessible place out here in the Bay Area. So that's
is it? I didn't know that. That's very important.
Yeah. Well, I've been told by my friends who use manual chairs that it is, very hilly, but there's definitely just an abundance of curb cuts and like all the sort of the things that make a place feel much more accessible. Public transit's accessible. There's like, you're not the only wheelchair person that like, the person at the coffee shop or in the store has ever seen before, so it does feel, it feels like really, like the most accessible place out here.
Yeah. I think in Cleveland, I would say it's not accessible, but it's not very accessible friendly. They have a lot of things. So even going places, I have to go use the bathroom after like, all right, this door is too small. So I have to like think outside the box of how to do things. Like I have to make a plan and figure out what am I going to do if I have to use the bathroom or things like that. So I definitely would like them to be more handicap accessible, wheelchair friendly here.
Yeah.
It's not that bad because I can adapt to things. And if you can adapt to it, you're pretty much, you don't, I guess it's not that it doesn't matter. It's just like, I can adapt to this. So it doesn't really, I'm going to enjoy myself regardless.
Yeah. No, sometimes, right. Sometimes you want to enjoy yourself and you don't want to spend all your time frustrated that like, something, my partner and I and our kiddo were trying to go and see a movie the day, I guess yesterday. And all the elevators were out at the mall that we went to go and see the movies, but there weren't signs anywhere. So we had like got tickets and stuff like that. And
wow.
So of course we were all like, especially like my husband was just getting, we're all mad. And but at the same time, it's like, oh, but we don't want to spend our time being mad. We want to go out and like do something fun. So it's always that balance between like, okay, this isn't right that there's not signs, and I want to like make them know that like they need to do better in terms of access, but also like, I want to like have a nice time and not just spend my time like totally angry,
Yeah, and that's the thing because in my head I'm like I deal with this on a regular basis, but certain business owners, it's not really in their mind to accommodate the to people in wheelchairs or disabilities. So in my mind, I try to say, that is, but all we can do is try to educate, and that's what's in my control. I can't control how people run their establishments. And
Yeah.
I would hope after I educate them on things, or at least put it in their mind, they would want to change, and because
Yeah.
feel like they want my business, but you can all you can do is educate.
Yeah, I agree. And like, it's one thing when like a smaller independent business like just hasn't, they have so many things that they have to figure out, just like
Mm-hmm.
starting a business and running a business and stuff. And I've found that like those folks tend to be, those establishments tend to be so much more open to when I'm like, hey, it'd be really helpful to put a sign or to like,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. And then but then it's when it's like you know, the big corporations or like the places that can afford to do
Yeah.
the
Uh-huh.
extra bit, that's when I tend to get kind of like, this isn't right.
Right. This is not right.
Yeah.
So, being out there now, you do use a power chair. So I know I use a power chair, and I love just being able to go out and just be free as much as possible. Like, so, you talking about it being handicap accessible and friendly. Like, how are
Yeah.
the sidewalks and things like that?
Oh, in the Bay?
Yeah.
Yeah, the sidewalks are really I mean, I think that's one of the things, right? Like the sidewalks in Berkeley especially
Mm-hmm.
are really good. There was actually an activist or a group of activists. I can't remember when. I'm going to hit myself after for not remembering, but I want to say maybe in the 70s or
Okay.
80s, who actually went around and like marked all the curb cuts that are
Okay.
all the places that didn't have curb cuts, and
Okay.
like basically did all these actions to like I can't remember. I don't think it was here, but there's one place where where activists actually went in with a sledgehammer, right, and like
Mm-hmm.
hit the corner of a curb and like to show the need for curb cuts. So in Berkeley they're good. In Oakland and San Francisco, I would say that they're more hit or miss. I mean, like everywhere, there's definitely areas where like suddenly there's just not a curb cut, and I like have to drive in the street for a few
Yeah.
blocks, and yeah. So
That's definitely me here in places that I've lived. Sonora, what do we do? I know that you're an author, so I
yeah.
definitely want to talk to you about that. What made you, before we get into that, like what brought on this passion of writing? Um,
That's such a good question. Well, so my first passion was actually painting.
Painting,
I
okay.
Yeah. I spent years and years of my life as a painter.
Mm-hmm.
Painted did a lot of portrait painting, a lot of really large scale oil paintings, and that was kind of how I identified for a long time. I went to art school, but then I discovered like disability studies and disability community, and I just found myself really wanting to write more and more about that.
Okay.
And I always joke that like at a certain point, I was trying to make these paintings that were really argumentative, and that didn't work. They were bad paintings. I was like, oh, what I really need to be doing is actually like writing books where like that is what if you're writing the kinds of books that I write, that's kind of what they are. They're like arguments. They're thinking about ideas, and so I've started. I kind of fell into it like that. I definitely have always written, but I never really thought of myself as like, oh, I want to grow up and be a writer. I was much more like,
Okay.
I want to be an artist. And
Mhm.
I think that writing to me is very related to my art practice too. So
That's wonderful. Okay, so we talked about being in a wheelchair. Like, I want to touch on that before I like get on.
yeah.
And I meant to do that. Being disabled. What is your diagnosis? Why are you in a wheelchair?
So I have a diagnosis called arthrogryposis multiplex congenita. It is a mouthful. And I've had it. I've had arthrogryposis since birth. So my disability, who knows why one is born disabled. You never
Hmm.
totally can tell for sure. But I was raised with the understanding that my disability was, very likely caused by pollution in the neighborhood that I was born in Tucson, Arizona. And
Okay.
it was military or defense industry pollution. And that's really like the subject of my new book, Disabled Ecologies. It partially tells that story. But yeah, that's my as far as I know, my origin story to my disability. So yeah, and I've used a wheelchair since I was about 6. So I remember
Okay.
very vividly getting my first chair.
Yeah, me too. So talk to me. Like I said, I want to get into the writing things like that, but this is important for me to to ask questions because I know how I felt, and I want to know how, or if you remember, how did you feel being in a wheelchair or processing being in a wheelchair? Most likely, probably been in your teenage years. We're kind of
Yeah.
getting into our own and
Yeah.
having our own identity. Was that something that was very difficult for you, or that was easy? Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell, right? Because I don't have anything to compare it to.
mhm.
And your listeners probably know, but I don't. Did you become disabled later in life, or were you born with a
So
disability?
I have muscular dystrophy. I
Mm,
think it's called congenital myasthenia gravis.
also a
Um,
mouthful.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I started off walking, but as you get older, you kind of gain weight and things like that. So it's hard to like it puts you in a wheel. Eventually, it puts you in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
In a full time thing. I'm not paralyzed. Like I live on my own. I do a lot of transfer. It doesn't do anything. I just don't do any walking, and I don't think I've probably even said that on my podcast. To be honest with you, so
Yeah.
uh, thank you for asking
Yeah. Yeah.
that.
And so, how old were you when you first got your your first
I
wheelchair?
used probably so my family lived in Germany. My dad was in the army, so we lived in
Oh,
Baumholder, Germany.
okay.
It's a lot of hills and stuff in there, so you struggle with doing a lot of walking up hills and things like that. So
Yeah.
I believe it was maybe around the same part plus 6. I use a wheelchair part time.
Yeah.
When I was in ninth grade, I had scoliosis and I had that back surgery to put rods in my back around 14. That put me in a chair. Now that put me in a chair
Okay.
full time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, just because of everything and like I couldn't stand up straight anymore.
Yeah.
I could still stand up, but I just couldn't do a lot of walking. So that
Yeah.
that, that pretty much put me in the chair full time. And but yeah, so I used the chair part time around 6, 7, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, but then so like the experience as a teenager of like just being in a world that's not, like just physically so not built for you. Like yeah, I
Yeah,
mean
it definitely it makes your mentality kind of different.
yeah.
And I was just talking to a friend yesterday about I've been a big advocate of people going to therapy or talking to a counselor. And I
Yeah.
was like, I think I'm 39 years old. I'm like, I think I need to go see a counselor.
Yeah.
Um, and just to have coping, or because they're even asking for help
Yeah.
sometimes is a very hard thing for me to do.
Totally.
Um, because I feel like it's a burden, like I'm putting my burden on somebody else.
Right.
And I think when you grow up, when you grow up and the world is not built for you, it kind of makes you feel like a burden
Yeah.
in a sense. Maybe not for you, but for me, it
Oh,
made me feel like a burden.
yeah. Oh, I mean, absolutely, right? I mean, because also like our culture is so obsessed with sort of independence and the idea of being independent, and it's
Mm-hmm.
shameful to like ask for help and to need help, or you're a burden. I mean, those are, even if you grow up in a family that is really trying hard to not give you those messages, I think we
Mm-hmm.
get those messages just from like culture, right? Just from, and
Mm-hmm.
just from living in a society that's like that's perpetually giving us those messages. And so I think for me as a teenager, it was really hard. And
Mm-hmm.
I tried really hard to be to you know to figure out ways of coping and living, and like, honestly, for me, I really kind of buried myself into my own creative world, right? Like I was
Okay.
just like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
the world is hard, so I'm just going to like um really spend a lot of time doing my own thing. And I think that's like,
Mm-hmm.
one of the benefits of kind of being an introvert is that, like, I was like, okay, I'm gonna like go into this zone. And I think that like having art making really saved me, um because it was so hard. It's like making friends, figuring out how to like go to a store by myself, figuring out
Yeah.
how to go to a cafe by myself when I don't use my arms really. I
Mm-hmm.
have very little arm strength. So that if I go to a cafe, I have to be like, every step of the way, I have to ask for help. I have to be like, hey, will you give me, here's my money. Can you reach it? Can you carry my coffee to the table? Like all those things. And so, now that I'm in my early 40s, it's like, it's easier, but it took decades of practice, right? To like get to the point
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, you know whereas like some people just have so much privilege and entitlement, they're like, they're like are total pain in the ass to like,
Yeah.
they're
Yep.
they're they're the service workers who are there. And but the shame that I think for disabled folks is can be intense. And I feel extraordinarily lucky that I found disability community and disability activism in my early 20s. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found those people, because they were the people that were like, it's okay to ask for help. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
actually a really powerful thing to do.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up community because I'm a big community guy. I
Yeah.
I love being in a community with people, um and usually my community, I'm the only person in a wheelchair, so I bring a lot of education. And they say, I'm glad I know you because now I think about those things
Yeah.
that I never thought about. I actually think about those things, so it makes me feel like, and if that's the only impact that I've had, then I'm okay with that,
Yeah.
because now you think about, and if you think about me, you're thinking about the next person in a wheelchair
Totally.
with a disability,
Yeah.
with a disability. So it
Yes.
makes me happy that I'm able to do that and
Yeah.
um, get out there and get out of my comfort zone and have friends that are not in wheelchairs. They're important to have friends that look
Mhm.
like you because they understand you, and it's always good to know people that understand your struggle.
Yeah.
But it's also good. We have to educate others so we can have a better life, and
Yeah.
so that's pretty much my passion. One of my passions in life.
Yeah.
Um, but it sounds like you have a good life. You're married and you have a kid, right? You said
I have a 9-year-old. Yeah.
nine
That was
nine year old.
that was not something that I ever thought I would do, but it's been just a really amazing and fascinating experience to be a parent in a wheelchair who can't use their arms, I
Yeah,
mean, and but she's the greatest. She's like the joy of my life. So
that's good.
yeah,
I,
she's great.
so one more question before I go to you
Yeah.
writing books. You have a 9 year old. So how is that being a mother in a wheelchair and the difficulties, or
Yeah.
maybe like when you first found out you were pregnant, and you like, can I actually do this? Was there? I mean, I know that people feel that way. You know,
Yeah.
even able-bodied people say, "Can I actually do this?"
Yeah.
Was there like a big? Was that in your mind, or at least in the
Yeah.
back of your mind, like, am I able to actually do this? Like,
Oh, 100%, right? I mean, I think there was the question of like, am I actually physically able to do this? Am I
mm-hmm,
actually physically able to like have this kid and go through pregnancy and stuff like that? Um, and then there's the question of like, am I physically able to, am I able to be a parent, and to like raise a kid? And um, I am like incredibly privileged too in all sorts of ways, right? I
mm-hmm,
was like, I have a able-bodied partner. I'm
mm-hmm,
white. I have a secure like job, like all these things that also gave me a certain sense of like, or that made the outside world, I think, treat me a little, they were a little bit less freaked out.
yeah.
Right? Does that make
No, I
sense?
definitely understand what you're saying. I
Yeah.
definitely understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And so I think like there was, so I just wanted to say that first, because I feel like my situation was really unique, but also like I had so much sort of privilege in it as a
Mm-hmm,
disabled parent because of all that, and like my partner was able to like take off time and like help, like he really was super 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 present the whole when she was a baby, and
mm-hmm,
and still is. And so, but I mean, I think the thing about being a disabled parent is that, um right, I mean, like so many things as a disabled person, you're constantly kind of taught that that's not what you're supposed to do. You
mm-hmm,
don't see the role models, even though there are all of these amazing disabled parents out there in the world
mm-hmm,
who like now I look to, and I know many people and stuff. But that fighting that kind of sense of isolation of like, oh, you know is this, um like learning that you're not the only one to be doing this, or the first one, and not having to just totally reinvent the wheel. And so I kind of knew that just from figuring out other things as a disabled person. So at one point I was like, okay, I'm just gonna like search the internet and search
mm-hmm,
for moms with arthrogryposis, which again is my
mm-hmm.
disability. And I literally found like this amazing documentary about this mom in the UK who has like 3 kids, who doesn't use her arm. She's like, it was kind of weird watching it. I was like, whoa, you are basically like, we look the same, like the same.
Yeah.
And so, and watching that video and just watching her like carrying her babies without using her arms, like
Mm-hmm,
lifting them up like a mama cat, with by the back of
mm-hmm,
their onesies and stuff like that. I was like, oh, I can do this.
mm-hmm.
And that gave me so much confidence. And it made me brave enough to like continue. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's cool that you say that because I talked to people and I was talking to a buddy yesterday. He's going to do a situation, and I'm like, when I was trying to give him a little perspective on things, and I was like, look, man, I know growing up in a wheelchair, I didn't have a lot of role models to see people in
yeah,
wheelchairs, but like now, like I talk about social media. Social media is terrible sometimes, but
yeah,
it's also very beneficial. I had to go on and start looking at disabled content creators and things like that, and even interabled relationships, and you
yeah,
see those type of things, and it encourages you that yeah, I may have this disability, but I can still live my life to the fullest,
yeah, yeah,
and that gave me the confidence to um, keep going, to say, hey, I can live this life. I'm going to be happy and enjoy every moment of my life.
yeah,
So it's like when you start to look and you say, look, well, let me do some research. Let me see if I can find people that look like me, that because you want the same life that everybody else have.
yeah,
And there's something in your mind like, but can I? But when you see somebody that's in your situation that's doing it, and not just doing it, but being successful with it, it really encourages you.
yeah.
It really encourages you.
Oh,
So,
totally. Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. I mean, and I think, right, we're told, like, I think there's all these things that disabled people are not supposed to have or want or be able to get, jobs and
Mm-hmm.
education, like love and romance or sex or all these things, being a
Mm-hmm.
parent, all these things. And I think one of the things that the internet has, as you're saying, really helped um, make us see as it's connected disabled people to each other,
Mm-hmm.
like, that it's like, oh, there's tons and tons of disabled people who are living beautiful lives and who, have partners or who are out there, have are living their best lives. So
Yep.
and just
Mm-hmm.
seeing that, I think, is like a really powerful um thing, because then it changes the narrative, right? It changes the stories, and it changes what you think are allowed to want and what you.
Yeah. And that is a message about the narrative. The narrative is not always right,
Yeah.
and you can change the narrative. you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. And we
if
need
you
to
do,
change the narrative so much.
yeah, if you don't see somebody that look like you, be the first person.
Yeah.
Somebody has to be the first to do anything. So, um,
Yeah.
if I want to do something, if I don't see somebody else doing it, then I'm going to try to be the first person to do it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we'll lead us back into the writing. Um, it's just so. How many books have you written?
I've
I don't even know if I
I've
said that right.
yeah, no, that's I've written two. Written
Okay.
two. They've each taken me a long time. They've each taken me 8 years.
Okay.
So I'm not a very fast writer, but
Mhm.
then I'm not very fast at doing anything. So yeah.
When you're writing, and I think it's fascinating. Honestly, I don't know. Have a I don't know if I want to write a book one
Yeah.
day, but it's in my head. I got a buddy that writes books. He's a pastor at a church,
Yeah.
and he's written a couple books. And it's not something that's on my mind, but it's on my mind.
Yeah.
And I feel like um, I could be in a process of it. I'm collecting uh, info on it, and every once in a while I have that moment where I'm like, oh, this is a cool idea, and for a chapter or something like that, an event that happened in my life that I could write about. But what is your process on write? What has been your process on writing these two books?
What has been my process? Well, now I'm just distracted and curious because I want to know what your book would be about. um, so I'm gonna
uh,
turn it around to you. What would you write a book on if you were wanting to?
I think that I've always I love community, but like I would say over I want I'm saying redemption right now, but I think that we're all trying to redeem ourselves from something, whether it's good or bad. Like
Hmm.
I'm not a bad person, so I want to use that redeem. Like I've been a bad person,
Yeah.
but I guess I would just say overcoming. Like just talk about things that in my life, overcoming being in a wheelchair or
Yeah.
my family, growing up, like if you would talk to my mom or my brother, they would say, he was a happy person. I always had a smile on my face, and that is true. I was happy, and I've had a smile on my face. But but reality, looking back, I was a very miserable person,
Mm.
and not in the sense of like I wanted people to be miserable, but I was just very unhappy
Yeah.
and non-accepting of being in the wheelchair, um, and watching my friends because, like I said, there was not a lot of people in my life that were in wheelchairs that that were I wouldn't call myself popular, but popular. You know,
Yeah.
I was pretty much I had friends, but I'm the only person in my friend circle that was in a wheelchair, so people couldn't relate to me. And then even the aspect of I don't know how religious you are going to church. Um, I was a kid that went to church every Sunday,
Yeah.
so when I go to the altar, I may be struggling with something, and the preacher would pray. about me getting out the wheelchair or being healed, God
Yeah.
healing me, and I'm out the wheelchair, which is fine, and um, which is fine. But like I was dealing with so much more than that.
Yeah.
It distracted me from living my life,
Yeah.
and things like that. There's a lady, she has a book, and I haven't finished it yet, and I don't even know her name is. It's called. I'm gonna look. I'm gonna try to see if I can find it now in my audio because I'm a big audio book person. Um, um, I'm gonna have to edit this and keep it when I do this. I can find it. Let me see if I can find it. My body is not a prayer request,
Mm. Yeah.
and she was going through some things and talking about some things that, and I'm like, wow, I was dealing with that growing up.
Yeah.
Those type of things, and I don't. Those people, I don't fault them because to them, being in a wheelchair is probably the worst thing that they can go through. So like they can't comprehend a person being happy in a wheelchair. Now, do I wish I was in a wheelchair? Absolutely. But is there something I could change about it? No. And so so I guess my question is what my book will be about is that um, when life give you lemons, make lemonade.
Yeah.
In a short version of that, and talk about events in my life that have changed my mindset, my mind, things like that. But I don't know if I would write a book, but it'll probably be about that.
Yeah.
You can overcome anything. Just change your mindset.
Yeah.
Um, there's people I talk to, and it's like when you talk to them, their their aura, everything about them is just negative.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how do you expect your life to get better if you think negative all the time? If you don't have any positive thoughts, your life won't get better.
Yeah.
You have to have some type of gratitude. So whether you believe in God or your God is universe or anything, you have to put hope in something.
Yeah.
It could be a lamp. I don't care. Just if you look at that lamp and say thank you or have some type of gratitude, like it'll change your life and it change your perspective on life.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I quite answered your question because my
Yeah.
thoughts with that is very unorganized, but I'm just gonna give you my unorganized thoughts right now.
No, I think on like so many of the struggles and the confusions, right? Of like, right. Of also like living in a body that people that kind of is like, right. Like everybody has suffering. Everybody in the world
Mm-hmm.
has suffering, has things that they've lived
Yep.
through that are intense, have sadness, have trauma, right? But like, I think the thing is for physically disabled people, it's like, it's almost like we we are like marked by it or something. It's like people project that like it's
Mm-hmm.
like okay, that is like it's like we wear the thing that we struggle with, even though we also
Mm-hmm.
probably struggle with all sorts of other things, you know. But then I think that allows people, you know, like the people who want to pray over you and stuff like that, or who are only kind of you know wanting, you know, thinking about that aspect of your life as being the thing that, you know, you might be struggling with, like it I'm not sure exactly what I'm trying to say, but I think that there's something so much about the um just how much people project suffering onto people in wheelchairs or disabled people,
Mm-hmm.
right? That then it's like, to some extent, I'm always kind of wondering. I'm like, well, if I lived in a society that didn't just think that being in a wheelchair was bad, so bad, that was like accessible, that understood that disabled people can do everything, do things that
Mm-hmm.
other people do, like would being in a wheelchair then be that bad? You know, like I think there's kind of, it's this confusing thing, right? Where we're constantly told that, but then it's like that also, again, getting back to the idea of like making the narrative, it's like, that's like then the story that's repeated over and over again. And so anyway, yeah, I don't know if that made very much sense, but I think that's something that I definitely think about and struggle with, you know, because like I want to respect that people like, yeah, I don't want to like pretend that like being in a wheelchair is just easy and dandy all the time. But I'm also like, I think it can be harmful when people project so much baggage onto us too.
Yeah. You're definitely right. And it messes with your mindset a lot.
It messes with your
Um,
mind.
yeah. And I do that, but I think I'm a little bit more clear headed on things now in my life. And I honestly don't care. Like, I'm happy with my life. And
Yeah.
um, I am a believer of God, and I like to pray. And that's where I find my hope. So um, I hope that my hope is that I do live. I am granted a life of fullness,
Yeah.
and that's all I could ever ask for in life, and that's all I ever wanted was a life of fullness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, tell me about your books.
Okay,
Yeah,
my method my process you asked about.
yeah,
Yeah, you know, I don't know if I have a single process. I just like I write when I can. I really like to
mm,
work in like intense bursts. So I'm
okay,
not someone who's like I write at the exact same time every single day in the morning or something like that.
mm,
I'm much more the kind of person that's like, if I have 3 days when I know I'm going to be all by myself, then I'll just like write in a flurry.
yeah,
So I like that kind of those intense, you know, I'll like get a pack of cookies and some like instant coffee, and I'll just like sit there for hours and hours and hours. That's kind of my process, which is
I
probably
got you.
why my books have taken me so long.
Yeah. So are these books about disability or just
They
uh,
are about disability. So they are. My first book was called "Beast of Burden: Animal and Disability Liberation," and
okay,
it's sort of about the ways in which the animal rights movement and the disability movement have been kind of put into tension with each other, and it's actually kind of making the case that disability movements and animal rights movements have a lot to offer each other. So that's my
okay,
first book. And then my book that just came out is about environmental justice and disability, and really bringing disability more into the conversation around like climate change and pollution and environmental catastrophe that we are all living with right now. Um,
hmm,
and that book is called Disabled Ecologies: Living Lessons from a Wounded Desert. And it partially tells the story of the pollution that I grew up hearing was the cause of my own disability.
that's very intriguing because I've never even hearing like a disability caused by pollution. I think that's something serious, and I've never even thought of that of being the possibility of somebody being disabled. Um, it's kind of wild to me. Like in my head, I'm just trying to process it. I'm trying to like talk to you, but like in my head, it's like trying to process that. And
Yeah.
um, but your first book, talking about the two disability and the animals act rights. So you said it's a. I didn't read the. I haven't read in the book, so I want to
Yeah.
ask you, like, is it like, are you saying they should collaborate with each other, or like kind of work together for things, or just showing the comparison of the two?
Yeah. So one thing I'm definitely not comparing disabled people to animals. That's one thing I'm
Yeah, no,
not
yeah,
doing. Yeah. I say that because part of the problem with the way in which some philosophers have argued for animal rights is by
mm,
basically kind of bringing disability into the conversation, like, you know, kind of saying things like, well, um, you know, non-human animals may not have language, but neither do all human beings, right? Because some, and so, or they may not be rational, but not all human beings are rational because, that there's people with disabilities, or there's folks that, or there's, infants or whatever it is. And so my goal in that book was actually to intervene in that philosophical conversation and show that argument doesn't help anyone. It doesn't, because it was pitting disabled community, disability activists against animal activists. It also didn't help that one of the leading animal activists who's always quoted in things is this guy who said a lot of Peter Singer, who has said a lot of really just pretty like crappy stuff about disabled people, and like the ways in which we live our lives and the value of that life. And so I was trying to change that conversation and to show actually that whole way of arguing is bad for disabled people, but it's also bad for animals.
Yes.
Because, if our compassion towards other creatures is just based on whether or not they have language, or whether or not they have some, idea of what it means to be rational, then that's how do I say, it's like the terms of that sort of argument are already set up to benefit humans more than to benefit animals, right? Like it's not like, yeah. And so that was kind of what that book was looking at, is how, essentially what I'm arguing in that book, or looking at, is the way in which like ableism is, in my opinion, really entangled with speciesism, and that the sort of way in which certain abilities, certain capacities are like privileged and considered to be really important, and then those beings who don't, or who either people perceive as not kind of having those capacities, then are kind of left to be exploited or to be discarded. So that's a lot. That's what that first book was about. And then and then this book is really, the Disabled Ecologies is really much more thinking about the like just the importance of disability and health and illness being part of the environmental conversation, and how much human health is absolutely like inseparable from the health of our from nature. And that like in this moment of like climate crisis and environmental crisis, that like, that's leaving so many people disabled, that is harming disproportionately disabled communities who like, already may have a harder time evacuating or whatever it is, right? That disability needs to be a part of that environmental conversation.
For sure. I definitely agree with that. And I think that I'm going to start to do a little research on that myself. And I thank you for bringing that to my attention. And that's one of the reasons why I do the podcast, because I don't know everything related to disability because I have a disability. And I want people to know, like, that there's a lot of perspectives. There's a lot of truths to this. And your perspective is different from mine, because I wasn't put in that situation where it said, well, you're in a wheelchair because of pollution or, the environment going in. So I definitely appreciate you for coming on the show. Even just saying that, because that just kind of blew my mind. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I never thought about it, but writing these books. So when you write the books, do you do any public speaking? Do you travel?
Yeah. So, I'm going to be honest that I don't love like, I don't love the process of traveling. Like, I don't love getting on a plane, and like, as getting on a plane as a wheelchair user is so
stressful.
It's stressful. They break your chair. They, it's bad. But I'm also like, I've only written I've written 2 books. They each took me 8 years. You know, I was like, this,
Mm,
I'm gonna celebrate that this book is out. And so I've been traveling. I've been giving some talks at bookstores and at universities, and that's just been great. It's been really fun doing a lot of podcasts and stuff. And it's been great to actually be able to share these ideas that I care about a lot. I mean, I spent 8 years thinking about them and writing about them. And you know, I wouldn't have done that if I didn't think that they're important, you know, again, just especially because like we're running out of time in terms of
mm,
environment stuff, you
mm,
know, and I just see the tremendous impact uh, on disabled communities and disabled people, and just, you know, all sorts of communities that
mm.
are in really vulnerable positions because of what's happening environmentally. And I think that we need to, as disabled people, be part of that conversation.
I definitely agree with you. Oh, I definitely agree with you there, and that is pretty. I'm sorry, I didn't knock my cord out of my
Oh,
laptop.
that's all good.
Yeah, I'm all good. So I make sure everything was straight. Yeah, so I definitely agree with you there, and I would like to, have more education on that because it's fascinating to me. Um, so um, I would like to do traveling. I'm trying to find other ways, ventures of doing a podcast, but the podcast helping me with opportunities to do some speaking.
Yeah.
Um, because I think that stories need to be told, and if we don't tell the stories, they won't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's just I'm trying to find some things or figure out. I don't know how I'm gonna do it, but one day I will, and I'm
Have
going.
you have you ever come out here to the Bay Area?
I've never been. I've been to Sacramento
Okay.
when I was younger because I've had a muscle biopsy, and I've been outside of Fresno one time to visit my brother and his family when they were out there stationed out there in the Navy. But that's about it. I've never been out west too much.
Yeah.
Um, I I don't know. Yeah, I think Tennessee, Nashville, probably the most west I've been. Outside of
Well,
those two times.
I love Tennessee. I have family in Nashville, so
Okay,
yeah. So
I'm about 2 hours away from Nashville.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Mm.
at least you're in a beautiful state, though.
I love it. I don't think I would ever move away from Tennessee. I just once I came down here, I went to school out here,
Yeah,
and when that chapter of my life was over with, I left and to go back up north, and it was like, you know what, Tennessee is my home, and I've been back almost 10 years now, being
yeah.
in Tennessee. So,
That's
I
cool.
mean, Cleveland is a little suburb, I believe. If anybody listening that's from Chattanooga, please don't kill me if that's not true. But I believe this is a suburb of Chattanooga.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, traveling is so great, and I love it. I love going to new places and meeting new people and stuff like that. And you know, so I definitely, if you can find some ways of doing it, doing more uh, public speaking things, that I think you'd have a lot of fun, meet a lot of
yeah,
great people.
I definitely will. And you brought up the traveling, being in a wheelchair, and it's very stressful.
Yeah.
That's probably the most stressful. Getting on the plane, and fortunate for me, I don't know if you have to bring your power chair with you. I bring a manual chair. So fortunate for me, I don't have to really worry about my chair breaking or anything like that. But
Yeah.
it is very stressful. I think for me is like I said, I keep saying stressful, but
I know. I mean, because that is what it is.
it
It is so
yeah.
stressful. I mean, there's a reason why there's all these stories on Twitter and stuff like that disabled people share of, like, you know, their wheelchairs being thrown, like literally sitting on a plane watching their wheelchairs being thrown, or the
Mm,
like indignity of like being, you know, getting in the chair that they strap you in to put you on the plane, and
Mm-hmm.
like, especially when like everything's kind of late, and then they do that when there's already like a full flight and everybody's looking at you because they're like, you know, as if it's your fault that the flight is still, delayed.
Yes.
It's just, it is an extremely stressful situation, which again, I think a lot of, you know, society kind of teaches us to put that shame on ourselves and be like, oh God, this is just embarrassing or shameful or like hard. But actually it's like, it's such a messed up system that like,
Yes.
and
Mm-hmm.
so traveling doesn't have to be that hard for disabled people, but they certainly, make it hard. So
I think one of the worst things, especially me being on a plane and we're already late. Not that because usually I'm the first person. We're usually the first person on the plane.
yeah,
But sometimes people don't see um, that you're the first person on the plane. They don't see the wheelchair, so they're trying to make it to the connecting flight, and they're waiting for me to get up and move. And I'm like, you're gonna have to try to get around me because I'm in a wheelchair and I have to wait till pretty much everybody's off the plane.
yeah,
And I can go into that plane thing. I know we run out of time, but like, even having to use the bathroom on the plane and having to go, that's non-existent. I'm not going to be able to use the bathroom on the
oh
plane.
no, you just hold it there. It's an
Yeah,
impossible, it's an impossible thing to do. So
and so the whole thing just stresses me out. So like, I'm like, make sure I have to use the bathroom before I get on the plane. And because I know that I'm not going to be able to use the bathroom on the plane, I feel like my body's like, hey, we're going to have to use the bathroom again. It just
yeah,
makes me just uncomfortable.
yeah.
And
My
I just,
strategy the last few flights has been, because yeah, it's like, you're not going to be able to use the bathroom, so then you get dehydrated from not drinking enough water, or
mm-hmm,
not drink. So I've been trying to eat, like bringing like tangerines or something onto the
yeah,
plane with, so because
mm-hmm.
so it's like I can kind of like get some hydration, but it won't like, but like having to do stuff like that is just like so not cool.
It's really not cool. And and like I was saying earlier, like we adapted things like, it's like whatever, and you kind of get used to it, but it shouldn't be like that. It
Yeah.
really shouldn't be like that. And I knew when I went to Orlando this year for I went to a podcast fest. It's called Pod Fest in Orlando. I met a buddy down there, picked me up from the airport, and he had reserved uh, a hotel, and it was like, look, we need a wheelchair friendly bathroom,
Yeah.
and they gave him a hearing impaired hotel hotel room.
You're
And
like,
so
nope,
it's
not
like,
the same thing.
yeah, like no, so it was tough, and we was calling. He was calling. He was like, he said, look, well, I have a gym membership, so if all else fails, I will just take a shower there. We get dressed there. And I said, that's fine. I don't really want to do that, but that's fine.
Yeah.
But he said, man, I'm telling you, it's not fine. It's really not fine. You shouldn't have to go through that.
No.
And I'm like, I agree with you, and I understand that, but I've lived my life. You know, this is my life,
Yeah.
so I'm able to say, you know what, it's a crappy situation, but how can I make the best of this? I'm down here. I want to have fun and I want to enjoy myself, and I
Yeah,
don't want to have.
you don't want to spend your whole time fighting with the hotel. I mean,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I so get that. I mean, it's like that is always the tension, right? Of like just being angry and it's not right, and then also just like you can't be in battle mode all the time. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you want to
That's a good way to do it. A good way to say it. You can't be in battle mode all the time. It's
yeah,
very exhausting.
yeah,
It's just
too
like, all right, we have a plan. I don't really care for it, but if I got to go to the gym to take a shower, at least I have a shower.
yeah,
Um, uh, so it's like I'm going to, but we ended up finding a hotel that was accommodating and where I
oh
was
good,
able to take my shower there and things like that. So it worked out at the end. But he was like, but because he's like, I really don't want you to have to do that. He continued to make phone calls,
yeah,
and we're good friends, and And the reason why I say that is because like it pays to have good friends.
It does.
You know, they don't have to go through this all the time, so they're not exhausted by it.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah. No, I totally 100% like friends, family, like if they want to take up the like, being angry on the phone for 2 hours, then more power to them. But like, yeah, sometimes we can't do that all the time.
Yeah, and it's just like we're tired. And but Sonora, I don't know if we got to everything that you want to talk about, and if we haven't, I feel like I could talk to you for 3 more hours, to be honest with you. And so
Yeah, this was so fun.
yeah, you're always welcome back if you have books and things like that. You're always welcome back to talk about them. And um, like I said, these are conversations I enjoy. This is why I like do podcasts to people
Yeah.
to talk to people like you and to open my eyes, not just open up the able-bodied eyes, but open my eyes up to things that I have not thought about. Because just because we're in wheelchairs, we share that perspective, but also we have two different perspectives on being in a wheelchair, and I love to have these type of talks. So I definitely appreciate you for being on the show. And if you would like to say one last thing that I didn't ask you or we didn't cover, here's your time to say it.
Oh, I honestly just want to just say that this has been really fun, and I'm so grateful to you for like having a podcast like this where you are getting these various different perspectives on, on all sorts of things, but on like the experience of disability and being a chair user, and like because these are conversations that don't happen as much as they should. And so, yeah, just thanks for giving a platform for that. And for letting me talk about my books too. I'd like that. That is really fun to have when you work on something for so long, it's just really exciting to have it out in the world and stuff. So